Welcome everybody back into Nerd Sesh. As always, I'm Carson Brever, and alongside me is Logan Camden, and we have so much to cover today. We are going to talk about the two biggest NBA games that we saw over the weekend, Celtics-Lakers and Nuggets-Thunder, but Logan, we've got a whole lot of football news to get into because free agency has begun with the legal tampering period, and we've also had a few big-time trades go down around the NFL that we haven't had a chance to talk about yet. So that's what we're going to be doing today, going through all of the big offseason news so far. It may be that something breaks while we are recording, in which case we'll just react to that in real time. But the deal that just went down less than an hour before we started recording, Sam Darnold, Logan, to the Seattle Seahawks on a 3-year deal worth up to $110 million. This comes, of course, immediately following a couple of the other big moves of the offseason, that being the Seahawks trading away Geno and them trading away DK, which we will get to. But how do you feel about them taking on Darnold, considering the direction that they've taken throughout this offseason so far?
I'm going to be honest, Carson. I think this has a chance to be one of the most disastrous signings of the offseason. And the only reason I feel like that is because I think Minnesota was the perfect situation for Sam Darnold. Like, I only think he can possibly look worse here in Seattle. And I'm a little skeptical that they moved on from Geno so easily because I am really high on Geno, and I think he elevates this situation. We'll talk about him in a little bit, but I don't really think the numbers do him justice and how good he was.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, man. I don't think this is an optimized situation for Sam Darnold. I think this offensive line is really bad, especially pass blocking wise. Darnold, if he struggled in any area last year, it was when he was under duress and had to make plays by himself out of structure. And that's where I really worry about Sam Darnold here in Seattle. And so, based off the year that he just had, sure, he was going to warrant this kind of money, but I was hoping he was going to go to a situation that was much better. And yeah, I just don't know how he's going to look better than he did in Minnesota last year, and I think this situation is markedly worse. You're allocating a lot of cap room to a guy, and let me be clear about something. I'm not saying that Darnold is going to regress back to like New York Jets Sam Darnold. I think Darnold has taken a leap from that guy. I think he's a starting caliber quarterback. But when you pay a guy this much money, I think you really got to be confident that he's a franchise guy, and I just don't know if Darnold's that yet. I think he's a starter in this league, but they've given him franchise quarterback money, and I'm not sure that I would have done that. Honestly, I would have been really, really comfortable rolling with Geno Smith for another year or rolling with Geno Smith for the next 3. I'm really that high on Geno. Yeah, I just don't – I think this could be one of the biggest dud contracts of the offseason just because they paid him like a franchise guy, and I'm just not sure that Sam Darnold is that.
It's just a bit of a confusing offseason so far for Seattle because they do move off of Geno just for a third-round pick, which to me is incredible value for another team to add him for. It makes me wonder why there wasn't a crazy market
I mean,
for
it
Geno.
is an expiring contract after next season.
I agree, and I understand that, and I think that's obviously why Seattle wanted to get off of him. They didn't want to pay a 35-year-old quarterback $40 million a year, especially if they didn't feel like he's one of the elite guys. Then they go and they move DK because presumably they don't want to pay him the 5-year, $150 million contract that he gets with Pittsburgh, which I can understand. That's a lot to pay DK Metcalf, especially when you feel like you have an emerging number one in JSN. But to then go from those two moves, which are very much pivoting away from a core that was actually quite good. Seattle won 10 games this past year, and they did that with one of the tougher schedules in football. And you feel like, if anything, Geno would have played better this year because he had, I would say, an abnormal amount of really bad picks last year compared to the previous 2 seasons. And because your offensive line was so horrifically bad that you would think you could at least rebuild it to some extent this offseason, that if you were to run it back with that same core, with the better offensive line, with the talent you have on the defensive side of the football, you'd be a legitimate playoff team. But they trade away 2 of their best players, and I do think that they downgrade a bit at quarterback with Darnold. Now, he is 7 years younger. He is probably $5 to $10 million cheaper per year, so you're saving a little bit there. But I don't know if Sam Darnold is ever going to look better than he did last year. And I don't know that Geno Smith, considering his talent, could really look much worse statistically than he did last year. We are talking about a bottom 3 offensive line in football, and that has to be improved significantly. And yes, there is receiving talent in the Seattle room, but they also just lost a big-time playmaker in DK Metcalf.
And they cut Tyler Lockett. I mean, he's been as stable as anybody. Lockett.
So right now you're really talking about JSN, and then they have a whole lot to figure out in that room. They have everything to figure out with the offensive line. This is a guy who was just throwing to the best receiver in football, one of the best receiving rooms in football, with a good offensive line, especially when Christian Darrisaw was healthy, with an elite play caller, and he only did it for the 1 year. So what's your confidence in him replicating anything close to last year's results? It's just not high for me, because Sam Darnold melted down under pressure in those last couple games of the season. It was as ugly as it possibly could have been, and I had been an optimist, and I had been a Darnold defender throughout the year, and that was a moment where you go, that's about as big a red flag as you can have, especially when this is a guy who holds onto the football for longer on average than anybody other than Jalen Hurts, I believe, and the other dudes who are holding the football for that long are like Lamar Jackson. It is the elite play extenders and athletes, and then you have Sam Darnold, and I just don't think that that is going to be remotely tenable behind this Seattle offensive line with the overall talent that they have offensively. And Geno threw some really bad picks under pressure last year, but Darnold takes so many more sacks. That is one of Geno's really high-end traits, is his ability to avoid sacks when under pressure. Darnold has the potential to make bad decisions, turn the football over under pressure, but more significantly, take 8-9 sacks in a game like we saw in the last game of the year for Minnesota. He's not nearly as sure a thing as Geno, and I'm just a bit confused because it seems like they were going towards a rebuild, which I didn't like. But now it seems like they're saying, okay, we'll commit money to the quarterback position, but we don't want to commit that much money to actual really good players offensively. And I don't see how they take that approach without taking a step back and now being more in that mediocre range.
Yeah, and on top of that, what I really don't understand about this for Seattle is why they felt pressured to make this move so quickly. You had Geno under contract for another season, so right, you didn't need to go out and get another quarterback immediately. More importantly, I'm always of the belief that quarterback should be like your cherry on top. If you're going to pay a guy, that should be like the final piece of the puzzle. All the old guys say this. I say this all the time. You build your NFL team from the trenches out. You start on the interior, and then you build outwards. And they just don't have an offensive line. That's what I don't get is you're going to pay all this money to Darnold. I'm befuddled,
you have
Carson. I'm just
a bottom tier
man.
offensive line right now. You have one really, really good young receiver, but basically nothing else in the receiving room. You have a very talented running back. I honestly say that they have 2 running backs.
Yeah,
I like with
Charbonnet
both Kenneth Walker and Charbonnet.
K9, yeah.
They were still one of the least effective run games overall. They didn't run the ball very much. They were 28th in total yards and below average in yards per attempt. Sam Darnold is not the guy who's going to clean that situation up. Geno could make mistakes, but he had the sort of elevator traits, again, with his ability to avoid taking sacks under pressure, with his raw arm talent, with his accuracy. And you were going to get some turnovers, but also he was going to make something out of nothing more than a lot of other guys could. That's not the role for Darnold.
I completely agree, and I also think Geno Smith has a lot of tread left on his tires. I know that you can look at the age of Geno, but this is a guy who hasn't gotten hit a lot, has not played a ton of NFL ball comparative to normal quarterbacks that are at this stage in their career. And what I mean by that is I still think this is a guy who is very athletic. I think this guy has a cannon of an arm. I think he's got a really good brain. Like, it's the best of both worlds, right? It's like a running back that gets sparingly used in college, and then when he gets to the NFL, he's really, really fresh. This is a guy who hasn't, been beaten down and faced a lot of hits and gotten injured a lot. Like, I still think Geno has a lot left in the tank for his age, and I just think he's a better quarterback right now than Darnold. So I'm really skeptical, Carson. Like I said at the top of this, I think this has a chance to be the most disastrous contract of the offseason. I think it's got a chance to be a big-time whammy for Seattle because that's the difference. It's what you said right there at the end. There are elevators, and there are limiters at the quarterback position. And I think Geno's an elevator. He might not be, he's not near the top of the guys, right? The top tier elevators in this game are Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, right? Geno's on the bottom half of those elevators list, but he is an elevator. I look at Sam Darnold as a guy that you need to elevate with the rest of your team, and I just don't see Seattle's roster being able to do that. So I really don't like this move for Seattle, man. I'm pretty puzzled by them so far.
I do like Darnold, and I don't think that this dollar value in a vacuum is like really an overpay. With today's quarterback market, you get him for $35 million a year. Like, that's not catastrophic, but it just really concerns me having a guy who has a propensity for negative plays behind the Seahawks offensive line when they've lost 2 of their 3 receivers. And this was already one of the most difficult situations for a quarterback to succeed in. So I do think it's a puzzling approach from Seattle. And if they're really factoring in the age here with him versus Geno, then it does seem like they're banking on Darnold being something of a long-term guy for them, which I just wouldn't be super confident in this situation. He has grown so much. The arm talent is there. The highs were really, really high. He can spin the football, but there were some very concerning low lows this past year. From the Vikings' perspective, how do you feel about them letting Darnold go?
They'll be fine. I mean, Josh Dobbs played quarterback under them, and they looked fine. Like, Minnesota is the perfect situation for whatever bridge quarterback that you get in there. If they bring back Daniel Jones, if they were to bring back Kirk Cousins, and I'm just throwing out these names here because I don't know who Minnesota's going to target and going to go after, but
they have to be intending for JJ to start now.
Oh, I forgot that JJ even existed.
That's definitely the plan here, man.
I mean, yeah, I'm not really a big JJ guy, but again, this is an optimized situation for him. He spent a year learning the system and, hopefully getting up to speed with what he's going to be able to do. But this is an optimal situation. It's an awesome offensive line. It's one of the best receiving cores in football. He's got a brilliant offensive mind coaching him. Like, every quarterback that plays in Minnesota is going to look at their best. And so whatever they do get out of JJ, I'm confident that it's going to be I think he can be solid. Like, I don't think JJ has to go above and beyond in this system, and I think that's the ideal outcome for him. I think their ceiling is probably a little bit lower with a guy like JJ in his first year than it would even be with a guy like Darnold who melted down, but I still like Minnesota's long-term prospects, and they're not paying a guy. They got JJ on that rookie contract, man.
Yeah, and you have an elite defense. You have elite skill position talent. They bring back Aaron Jones. I think that there are more important places for them to allocate their resources than the quarterback position, especially long-term. If they were to go out there and tag Darnold just to keep him for one more year, feel like he's more of a steady guy in terms of that veteran production compared to not really knowing what you're going to get out of JJ in his first year as a starter, all of that would have made sense. But you took the guy 10th overall. And if you can get any production from a quarterback on a rookie contract, we know how valuable that is in today's NFL. And you do feel like you have all the pieces around him to make him comfortable. And if he is going to be successful, this is the situation in which he's going to be successful. So you weren't going to go out there and have JJ on the books while you're also paying Darnold a 3-year, $35 to $40 million a year sort of deal. So I'm fine with it. I think the vision for them ideally would have been to retain Darnold on a lower dollar value, but he just played too well this year and the market got driven up, and so you end up in this spot. I do want to talk about the Geno move, going to the Raiders, Logan, for a 3rd-round pick. How do you feel about that for Vegas?
I love it for Vegas, and I think this is a really mutually beneficial deal if Seattle wanted to part ways with them. I will say, I think the Steelers traded for the wrong Seahawk. I would have much rather have gone out and gotten Geno Smith. Like, that's my big takeaway from all this. We'll get to DK in a minute, but I love Geno Smith. I think he is still one of the most underrated quarterbacks in all of football. I had a drastic turnaround. I didn't like Geno. Geno moved me this year. And again, people who look at just box score numbers and stuff will go, oh, Geno wasn't really that impressive last year. I'm sure you also think Bo Nix is a top 15 guy or something like that. Like, there's more to the game than that. And I think Geno is an elevator. Again, this is a guy that in a suboptimal situation produced in back-to-back seasons, still has legs and can get mobile and can create plays. I think that's his really special trait. You were talking about him avoiding sacks. This is one of the premier play extenders and play creators in football. And don't get me wrong, there is a good and a bad with the gunslinger, because Geno Smith is one of those gunslingers. Look, Geno is going to throw crippling interceptions that are going to break your heart. Geno's also going to make some crazy plays that only a few quarterbacks in the league can make, and that's why I like Geno Smith. Like, I think Geno's a legitimate elevator. I don't think Vegas gave up too much. I think a third-round pick is about
Oh,
right
yeah.
for Geno. I would have probably been willing to give up a little more to go and get him, even though he is an older guy on an expiring contract. I think Geno's that good, and if Seattle wanted to move off of him, wanted to get off the money, I think this is a win-win for both sides if Seattle wanted to get off of him, but I think Geno's a damn good quarterback, and considering that Vegas, I mean, that's been their gaping black hole for Vegas is Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell, and it's
Yeah.
like your ceiling as a team is just 6 to 8 wins, no matter how good the quarterback is, right? Like the rest of your roster can be A1. If that guy's under center for you, you're just putting a hard cap on what you can accomplish. The Raiders are going to be way more competitive, and I'm glad they made this move too, because you just think about their division, right? You're playing Mahomes twice a year. You're playing Herbert twice a year. You're playing the Broncos twice a year, right? They're a great team. This division isn't getting any easier. It's going to be cutthroat, and I think the Raiders have evened the odds up a little bit. They've definitely got a little bit of ways to go of building the offense around Geno out, but I like the foundation of Geno as a quarterback. Like I said, I think he makes guys around him better. I think he's an amplifier. I want that guy under center for me, and it has been the biggest hole for the Raiders for the past few seasons. So I really
Yeah.
like this for Vegas, man. And potentially, because he got dealt, maybe you can get him on a more value contract next year, Carson. Maybe you're seeing that the market isn't that, isn't that competitive for Geno. Maybe you could see if you could re-sign him for $30 million a year on a 2 to 3 year deal. So, because I do think this is a loss if Vegas isn't able to bring him back. It would suck to give up a third round pick on a rookie contract and then lose Geno next offseason. That would be a loss to me for the Raiders. But as long as they can retain him for longer than this season, I really do like it for Vegas.
It's really good value. You are getting clearly a top 15 quarterback for
Yeah,
a third round pick.
I would say top 12 to 13. I think Geno's probably around there for me.
I will say that when I saw this, I was bummed out that Geno didn't go somewhere else for this price. You brought up the Steelers. That was immediately my thought, because now we have news today that Justin Fields is going to be a Jet. Like, the Steelers have so much defensive talent. They made the move for DK, but here they are in quarterback hell, and you could have just gotten a legitimately very good veteran starting quarterback, good guy, good leader, reserved.
Who can win a playoff game.
Exactly. He has that ability to go out there and duel with the high-end guys when he's at his best, and they didn't do it. Like, I just feel like there were opportunities for him to improve better rosters than the Raiders, because I just would have loved to see Geno on a roster that I feel like does him justice with an opportunity to go out there and win playoff games. That's not the Raiders. This was a 4-win team. This team was basically a disaster on both sides of the ball. They have Pete Carroll now, obviously, and so the intention is to be competitive, and I do think that Pete Carroll is a really, really good locker room guy. I think that he certainly knows how to build a culture. The Raiders are just in this interesting window where it feels like they are super invested in this head coach who's past 70 and this quarterback who's almost 35, which would very much indicate like a win now window. But then you look at their talent and you think like you're still really, really far away. So it's good for them because at the end of the day, this is the NFL. You don't tank for year after year like the worst teams in the NBA might, right? You are trying to rebuild yourself to competitiveness as quickly as possible. The Raiders have been almost non-competitive for 20 years now with a couple of very brief exceptions. So you can get the best quarterback talent you've had in that time, and I think it makes sense to do that at this value. But I'm not super optimistic about what's next for the Raiders. I just think they're very, very clearly still going to be the worst team in that division, but they go out, they re-sign Max Crosby, they extend him. So again, clearly they are committed to being competitive, and I think they certainly will be more competitive than last year. They're just still at a talent deficit. But we're not done with Seahawks news because, of course, your Pittsburgh Steelers, Logan, went out and got DK Metcalf, traded a second-round pick to Seattle to do so, and then also, with that, gave him a 5-year, $150 million extension. How do you feel about this for both sides? Let's start with the Steelers.
I'm so fucking tired of the Steelers, man.
Oh, man. I'm sorry to hear that.
This is an A+ for Seattle. The market seemed like it had cooled down. I give this like a C minus for Pittsburgh. And look, don't get me wrong. I like DK Metcalf, and I still think he also has tread on his tires. He's only 30 years old. This is a big, strong, physical, athletic receiver. This is a guy who's going to impact the game in all phases as a run blocker where he's mean and nasty and can manhandle cornerbacks. We can play some of that classic Steelers smash mouth football, but he's also just a physical freak. Like, this is a guy you can just send on go routes and throw jump balls up to, and he's going to make plays happen. So, I like the aggressiveness on the surface, right? I like the aggressiveness to go out and make big-time moves. We're putting the cart before the horse here. Who the fuck is going to throw him the football? Like, that's my thing with Pittsburgh. Their issue post-Big Ben, and I seem like the only jackass outside of the Steelers organization that realizes it, that's where we're missing, guys. The rest of the team is fine. I like the O-line now. I like our skill position guys. I love our defense. The coaching staff is solid. Who is going to throw the damn football? I can tell you, it's going to be Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers, and I'm going to... Oh, I want to pop, man. I don't want to do this, bruh. Also, just traditional football theory, I'm not a guy who likes to pay wide receivers. If you have a second-round pick, I would much rather you go and use that second-round pick, get a young wide receiver, get him on a rookie contract. We're paying DK Metcalf like a top 7 receiver. I don't think he's close to that. Like, I think DK is a top 20 to 25 guy. Like, I think he's a number 1 in the league, but he's not a top 7 receiver. And we're going to be giving this guy $30 million over the next 5 years. This is the highest total value contract of any active wide receiver. And so I don't know if this means George Pickens is going to get traded. That thought has run through my mind as well. I wonder if they just want to get him out of the room. I personally would love to hold on to George Pickens because I think that is a nasty 1-2. I mean, psycho freak athletic wideouts. I would love if we could hold on to both of these guys. But the point still remains the same. The Steelers don't have a quarterback. So what does it matter? And I said it a year ago. I wish I could put a bug in their ear. I said they should have accepted Justin Fields' $20 million fifth-year option because I could see what was going to happen. He was going to play a stretch of the season, he was going to look good, and then in the offseason, teams are going to go, damn, man, Fields, he might be a starting quarterback in this league, which is how I felt about him when we acquired him. It's how I felt about him when he was starting for us, and it's how I felt at the end of the year before the playoff game where the Steelers should have started him in the playoffs because one of two things could have happened. Justin Fields balls out and either wins or loses. He has a good game. And the Steelers go, hey, Justin, you're our guy. We're going to give Russ the boot. Or he craps his pants and he deteriorates his value in one game. It's a win-win for you if you just play the guy because he either feels that he has confidence that he's going to be your starter long-term. And that was the deal breaker for Pittsburgh. That's why he didn't want to go back because they didn't have the nuts to commit to Fields as the starter. And so if you have left yourself in the same position that you have been in every single year post-Big Ben, standing at the altar without a bride, we got God again, guys. We're going to be stuck with the old guy, with Russell Wilson, with Aaron Rodgers, with Kirk Cousins, with Derek Carr. What does that equal? A 10-7 season and a first-round exit. Like, it's a good deal, Carson. He's a good wide receiver. I hope that we hold on to George Pickens because I think this could be one of the best receiving tandems in football. But the Steelers are ultimately limited, their ceiling, by the quarterback position, which they, again, don't have. I am so frustrated. And like I said, the opportunity cost is really why I don't like this move. Because you could have just... This is a deep wide receiver class. I like a lot of guys in this class this year. And I think you could have very easily gotten a productive receiver. Obviously, he's not going to be immediately as impactful as DK Metcalf, but you're not paying the guy $30 million. I just feel like they blew their wad, man. They went to the casino, they played the first hand, and they said, all right, we're going all in. I just wish we had the QB, man, and I can see that we're going to get one of these older veterans, and they are all in the same tier to me. Old guys I don't want under center.
It's a big, big contract for DK Metcalf. It is a significantly bigger contract than like what Amon-Ra St. Brown signed.
And I think that's why
year.
Nobody wanted to trade for him. I think that's why the market ran cold.
It's hard for me to understand how DK is quite demanding this price, like you said, of a top 7 receiver. I do think that he's really good, but I also think Seattle was willing to part with him because they felt like they had a younger guy on a rookie deal who was already as good, if not better, than DK. So I like Pittsburgh being out there and being aggressive and actually adding high-end weapons. And if you're just trading a second rounder, I'm good with that. But to then also shell out this kind of money, and considering the opportunity cost, as you mentioned, like if I were to choose between, hey, I can give a third to get Geno and then pay him $40 million a year in a year, I have to give him that new contract, or I can pay this sort of money for DK and give up this sort of draft capital for DK. I'm 100% prioritizing Geno because you need that quarterback desperately. Like you said, the Steelers have been swimming in place for a handful of years now, and they find a way to put lipstick on that pig every year, and there seems to always be a new quarterback in the room, but it's never the answer. Still a pig, man. Nobody wants to kiss a pig, Logan. Well, I've known some guys maybe, but most people don't want to kiss a pig, and that's where the Steelers are. So what do you think they'll end up doing at quarterback? Because I think letting Fields leave for 2 years, $40 million to go to the Jets, that's just devastating. Because if you could have matched that contract,
no. I think the
Fields
Steelers
just
could
would have turned it down.
I'm telling you, the deal breaker for Justin Fields with the Steelers was the lack of faith that he had in them making him the starter. It was foolish when they turned down his contract last season. And again, it was foolish of Mike Tomlin to not pull the trigger and start him. This was a team that was spiraling down the second half of the season that needed a shot of life. And Russell Wilson was not the answer. I can tell you right now, Carson, we're getting Russell Wilson, we're getting Aaron Rodgers, we're getting Kirk Cousins. Beggars can't be choosers. We don't have the leverage. We don't have the cards, man.
Which one though, do you think, out of the group of old guys? Because I kind of think Aaron Rodgers.
We're gonna be the biggest sideshow in football next season. It is going to be drama. Every single week, we are going to be it is going to drive me insane. It's going to drive me crazy. I can tell you right now. It is going, and that's the one thing that just worries me. Tomlin and Rodgers both swinging their dicks in the same locker room because I don't know, man. I don't think that's going to end up well.
Yep. I just don't think you can possibly run it back with Russ.
I'd rather have Russ.
Really?
I'd rather have Russ than Aaron Rodgers. Let me think about it. No, I think I'd rather have Aaron Rodgers, but
yeah,
it's a shit show either way. I don't want Kirk. I don't want Derek Carr. At this point, considering that we're stuck between a rock and a hard place between Russ and Rodgers, I would take Rodgers. But the thing with the Steelers is I'm just still concerned about the solidity of this offensive line with an older quarterback under center. That's still my big problem. That's why I love Justin Fields as the guy under center, because with his athletic traits and his legs, he could mitigate the pressure that teams could get on him, and he could extend plays, and he could make stuff happen out of the pocket. Aaron Rodgers needs to be in an optimized situation. You asked me what the best situation would be for him. I would say a spot like Minnesota where the offensive line is perfect and he doesn't have to move. He can play that Joe Flacco turret-style football where he's just firing balls out. You can't do that in Pittsburgh. And, I think the offensive line is going to be better next year. Troy Fontenot will be healthy. Broderick Jones will hopefully move to the left side and be a competent NFL offensive lineman. I like the interior guys that we have, Frazier, McCormick. I don't think we're bringing back James Daniels. I think the offensive line is going to be better than next year, but I don't think it's going to be great. And I think for an older quarterback with limited mobility like the guys that we're looking at, you need a great offensive line, and that's why I don't like it.
Yeah, I don't think that there's a good outcome at this point. I think that Fields would have been the value option. I'm not extremely high on him being like a franchise quarterback for you, but I do think that you saw the value of his athleticism in the run game. I think that you saw that he's a talented young quarterback who has an opportunity to improve, who you could have gotten on a good value deal, who you have no questions about personality or leadership or some of the concerns that do obviously come up with an Aaron Rodgers. I think out of all of the quarterback options that you just laid out there, Rodgers is still the best. I think that he is still the smartest, best processor of the game. I think he's still the best arm talent. I think he's still the most accurate, and so I would take him over the alternatives. In terms of pure football ability, I know that you hate Derek Carr so much. You hate all of these guys. You hate Derek Carr. You hate Russ. You hate Rodgers.
I think...
Is there an argument that with Carr you still get a solid, capable starting quarterback who you're not worried about leaving for 4 weeks to go to ayahuasca?
I mean, I think they all really have their flaws. Russ is fool's gold. Russ is going to look good for 2 to 3 weeks, and then he's going to shit his pants. Kirk's arm is completely shot. I don't want Kirk.
I don't think you touch Kirk.
Rodgers,
his arm is shot, and he literally cannot move.
Rodgers is a locker room cancer, and Derek Carr is just Derek Carr. Like, there's not really anything bad. It's just Derek fucking Carr, man. Like, I really don't want that guy.
But that's what I'm saying. Does there come a point where you look at the options and Derek Carr being Derek Carr is the least of all the evils?
I don't think he is. I think Russ is probably the least of the evils. I would go Carson. Russ is delusional. And while I hate that about him, I also love it because I know that he can fire himself up he still delusionally believes in himself even though he sucks. Derek Carr just sucks.
I guess that's something, man.
Rodgers, Russ, Carr, Cousins in that order. Dude, I might be at a point where I might rather have Daniel Jones than Derek Carr or Kirk.
That's just insane. I don't know how you got this low on Derek Carr. Derek Carr was playing fine football this past year.
I don't know what games you were watching.
Bro, the Saints games. He still throws a pretty deep ball. He's good to throw a hospital ball every once in a while, but he's capable in the pocket.
He's not going to go and win.
Capably accurate.
He's not going to win you a football game.
Russell Wilson is?
I just did it a couple of times last year. I'd rather have
so
Russ
did Derek
than Derek
Carr.
Carr.
You're acting like the Saints didn't come out the gates
Dude,
dropping
we're comparing
40 on
Carson.
everybody.
We are having a classic nerd Sesh shit off.
We are having an absolute shit off right now, man, which really, really makes me feel bad for you as a Steelers fan because it's yet another year of this, but...
Shocker! Who could have seen it coming?
I feel bad about their options at quarterback. I just think Geno would have been such a perfect solution. Could have legitimately taken them up a tier in terms of these AFC conversations where you feel like now they actually have a chance. They're not going to be favored against the big dogs, but they have a chance. And with the level of quarterback play we're talking about, they don't. They don't have a chance.
Party on here if we had got Geno. I would have the jersey printed. I'd be wearing that thing right now, man.
You guys did also get Darius Slay. How do you feel about that?
I actually do feel really good about that. If there was another area of the team where I think the Steelers really needed to address, quarterback is still their biggest need. It has been. Their next biggest need is just competent cornerback play. Late in this year, after we were kind of beat up a little bit by injuries with defensive backs, we had Cameron Sutton out there who absolutely sucks. That guy's a bad human being and a bad football player. He shouldn't be on an NFL roster anymore. Like, I think he just has lost it. Joey Porter Jr., in my opinion, is a number one cornerback, but he needs help on the backside. And so I do feel a good bit more confident in our cornerback play. Slay is the number 2, a veteran guy. And this is something that the Steelers have traditionally done with older defensive backs. They brought in Joe Hayden. They brought in Patrick Peterson, guys that have just played a long time. So I think the Steelers are very heavily limited by speed on the back end. We don't have really any burners in our with our defensive backs. I think Minka, Deshaun Elliott, Peasy Jr., and Slay are all, they're not like super athletic, speedy corners, but they're all solid. And then I like being able to move Dante Jackson into more of a slot role or just being able to move those guys around. He's a really good add and a significant need for Pittsburgh. Yeah, I really do like the Slay move, but it's going to come back to the same thing, man. Who do the Steelers get at the quarterback position? That's still the biggest deal for them.
Yeah, the defense is going to be really, really good. No surprise there. Logan, would you believe that the New Orleans Saints were 5-5 when Derek Carr played and 0-7 when he didn't? And would you believe that they averaged 24.5 points per game when he played and 13 points per game when he didn't?
How much did they have when he did play? 24?
24.5. And whatever you're going to say, I'm going to say that's better than the Steelers.
I mean, Russ was probably around that. I mean,
let's see. The Steelers averaged 22.4, buddy.
Is that with Fields and Russ?
Yeah, that's between the two.
Yeah, I mean,
the last 5 weeks with Russ were terrible. Just terrible. Like, obviously, we are having a shit off here, but you talk about Derek Carr like he's a bottom 5 quarterback, when in reality, he's just a below average starter. He's accurate. He's smart. He's got a good arm.
He's going to turn the fucking ball over.
Like, not egregiously so. You hate Derek Carr.
Dude, any big moment in any game of Derek Carr, he has shit his pants. He's thrown a pick.
I just feel like you're forgetting who we're talking about here. We're talking
Carson,
about 2025.
It's
Russell
not
Wilson is the alternative.
2017 anymore. I don't want
I
Derek
know.
Carr.
That's why Russell Wilson isn't better than him. Look, man, I get it. You're literally choosing between your least favorite quarterbacks in the world here, so I feel for you, and we'll move on. We'll move on. We don't have to talk about the Steelers anymore, except we do have to talk about the fact that they did let Justin Fields go to the Jets for 2 years, $40 million. How do you feel about that for New York?
Ding! I mean, great play by the Jets, man. I keep talking about what teams with bad offensive lines need to do to get better. And I still think Justin Fields is going to be a bit of a frustrating experience when you're talking about him as a pocket passer. Now, he had his moments last year with Pittsburgh in big spots, making big-time throws downfield to George Pickens. I think the 5 or 6 games, however many we got out of Justin Fields in that early stretch, I think it's the best football Justin Fields has played as an NFL quarterback. It was controlled. He didn't turn the ball over. He completed a high percentage of his passes. He was getting first downs. He was just efficient. And then on top of that, we did see some of the high-end playmaking out of the pocket to a Pat Freiermuth, to a George Pickens. And I think the Jets are a very comparable situation to the Pittsburgh Steelers situation last year. Bad offensive line, good number 1 wide receiver. And I think Fields can make up for some of that, and especially with how the Jets want to win football games. That's why I thought Fields and the Steelers were a match made in heaven. This is a defensive-minded football team that wants to play ball control, grind you out football. You know, you could be like the clearance Baltimore Ravens. You could be the bargain Baltimore Ravens. And there's no shame in that. It's still a really good formula to win football games. And I think the Jets can do something like that. I think he will be better than Aaron Rodgers was last season. And maybe not necessarily in numbers-wise, but I think moving the chains, not getting just swallowed up and crushed by pressure, not turning the ball over. I think Justin Fields is a starting caliber quarterback in the NFL. And when you look at the state of that division, like I think the Patriots are going to be better. I think the Dolphins should be competitive, but I don't think the Jets are far away from either of those teams. And so at the price point too, are you kidding me? $20 million a year for 2 years when Darnold is getting 30, and I think it's a steal. I give the Jets a for this. I think this is a bargain contract. I think you got better at the position, and I think he is a guy that fits the style of play that your team wants to win football games with. So frankly, I never thought I'd say this. I'm jealous of the Jets.
Wow. I think that it's a good deal, just because I think anybody getting Fields at this value is a good deal. Like, I really am high on guys who you can find in that low mid quarterback market who you feel are starting caliber. Do I think that Fields is going to be a top 20 starter? No, I do not, but he does have the athletic tools. I think that he showed flashes in terms of progress in his ability to process the game this past year. I felt he didn't have as many moments of Fields wildly running around behind the line of scrimmage for 7-8 seconds and something really bad happening. So I think that he gives you a solid floor. Now the Jets have a lot to figure out outside of that, and I do worry a bit about Fields in this situation just because it's a really, really bad offensive situation. This was a very, very limited run game this past year. This was a bad offensive line, and Davante was a weapon when he was in that receiving room, and now you've lost him, so now you have to go about replenishing the depth and the guys around Garrett Wilson. This is still going to be a bad offense unless they make some other significant improvements. And now they've lost Morgan Moses. Not to say that he was great, but that's now another spot that they have to figure out on the offensive line. The Fields move is a good one, but it is far from the only thing that the Jets have to figure out before I think we're looking at them as a serious football team again. And obviously even the defense has to play up to their potential. Aaron Glenn has to get that side of the ball figured out because they really fell off there after losing Saleh. Jets fans, you got a little something to be excited about here, but there's a whole lot more work left to be done. We don't need to talk anymore about the Steelers side of this. I think we can both agree that it's a mistake for them to let Fields walk at this price. Let's talk about a guy leaving the Jets, Davante Adams, going to the Rams for 2 years, $46 million. We've had a ton of news about the Rams. There were talks that they were open to trading Stafford. It's been reported for a while that they probably are going to part ways with Cooper Kupp. But how do you feel about them going out there and adding Davante at this price?
This does seem like they're going to move on from Cooper Kupp at this point since they're acquiring Davante, which I don't blame them for. I mean, with his injury issues seeming like they're becoming a bigger and bigger issue, I understand that. This also seems like it might be a play to say, hey, Stafford, we want you to stick around. And I would be in no hurry to move on from Matthew Stafford. I mean,
No.
we're talking about Geno's age and stuff like this. Stafford was the number 1 pick in 2009. I still think he's a top 7 quarterback on the planet, maybe higher than that. I mean, Stafford on a given week can be the best quarterback in football.
Yeah.
And there's only a certain amount of guys that you can say that for. Matthew Stafford is one of those quarterbacks. And so when you have that guy, I never think quarterback's the most valuable position in football, right? You need a great team to win the Super Bowl. But when you have a guy like that, I never think your mindset should be, let's pivot away from this. Unless it really is dire circumstances and you need to go into a full rebuild, in which case I would say, go and get a second for him. Go and get a first, whatever you can get. I don't think the Rams are that far away. In fact, I think the Rams have done a pretty tremendous job of rebuilding this team up from all the capital that they gave up over the years building their super team, right? They traded for Jalen Ramsey. They traded for Matthew Stafford. They gave up a ton of capital to make those moves happen. I think they killed their draft last year. I think they've got a young ascending defense that I have a lot of confidence in. They still have got Stafford. I think the offensive line needs some work. That's really where I would focus the rest of my assets, I think, the rest of this season. But you've got Kyron Williams, you got Puka Nikola, you got Davante, you got the boy Matt Stafford, you got a young defense that's improving. I really like the direction that the Rams are heading in, and considering the circumstances of the NFC West, I think the Rams might still be my favorite again next year in the NFC West, man. I just think they've got the best quarterback in the division, and that's really, really meaningful. I mean, I wrote them off very early, even though I picked them to the NFC title game last year's preseason, and they bounced back from that. I think they're better with Davante, just considering Cooper's and Cooper's still fantastic, but I don't want to act like Cooper's washed. I think Cooper's going to go to a new team and be really, really productive again this upcoming season, but I think Davante's a little bit better now. He's a little more physical, and the Rams have gotten some more firepower. I think things are looking up for Los Angeles. I really like this move, and I don't think it's a terrible overpay, especially considering the length of the contract.
I actually think it's a great value signing. We're talking about DK raking in $30 million a year for 5 years. Davante obviously is an older receiver, but this is a 2-year deal at $23 million a year for a guy who was still one of the 10 most productive receivers on the planet. He was 9th in yards per game last year, still an absolute top-tier route runner. I think that Davante is still excellent. I think that he is still a top 10 receiver. I think that he is not just a lot better than Kupp, even though I would agree Kupp definitely isn't washed, but at the same time, he played 9 games in 2022. He played 12 games in 23. He played 12 games this past year. Like, if you're consistently missing 5 to 8 games and you're also on the books for $25 million a year, that's a problem. That's a problem no matter how good you are, and he has regressed from his peak.
Yeah, I think he's still technically sound, like route running hand, stuff like that, but there's definitely an athletic pop that isn't there that 100%. Was there with Cooper.
And that leads to an inconsistency where you have certain games where
he dropped 0 points for me in my fantasy playoff week, man.
Brutal. And then, like, there was the game very early in the year where they're down Puka, and it's just like Kupp and Stafford magnet ball. They have such good feel. Kupp is still such a high IQ, technically sound receiver, but he's not as productive week to week, and he's not nearly as available week to week. So I think that this is a really, really good move for them. They also go out and they sign Poona Ford. I think that that is a fantastic signing for them because we know how much speed and pass rushing they've added to their defensive line over the last couple years. To get a big 300-plus pounder who can eat up size in the middle and who can stop the run, that is exactly what they needed on that defensive front. So I'm really liking what we're seeing from the Rams right now. I think it would be crazy to trade Stafford. I just don't see the vision there. You have a roster that is good enough to win playoff games right now, as we saw. I mean, they ate Darnold alive, and they dominated the Vikings in a playoff game, and then they had an opportunity for a go-ahead drive against the Eagles. They got much closer against the Eagles than anybody else did in the playoffs, and Stafford is still a top 6 quarterback, in my opinion. Still can sling that thing, still thinks the game at such a high level. I'd be in on this group, and I would just continue to try to improve the offensive line, make some improvements on the margins defensively, but the Ford signing is an excellent start, and then I feel like you're good to go, and yeah, you could be the NFC West favorite, especially with the Seahawks taking a bit of a step back.
Yeah, and I think more importantly, too, I don't think you'd be able to get requisite value for what Matthew Stafford is at this point in his career. I don't know if a team would be willing to give you a first-round pick for an aging QB or a second or whatever it is. And at that point, all right, I'd rather just keep the guy and let's go be competitive. I mean, I think the Rams are going to be real contenders next year. And I'm glad you bring up Poona Ford too, just because if you were going to point to one thing that was their glaring weakness, it was size on the interior of that defensive line, and teams could just run all over them. Now you've got the young, explosive guys on the outside that can get to the quarterback, and Verse and Fisk and Turner. He's really solid too, but now you got a big boy too that can eat up the interior. I really like it for the Rams, man. I think they're kind of crushing this offseason so far.
They are. The Eagles ran for 285 yards on them, and that was after Saquon gave him 300 yards from scrimmage earlier in the year. Like, that's the biggest thing they had to figure out defensively. Now, again, bolster that offensive line, find a way to run the ball more consistently, but you got a top 6 quarterback and one of the elite receiving tandems in football. You get Puka healthy, hopefully, for all of next year because he missed a lot of time. Like, the Rams were so banged up early in the year. They dug themselves that hole. They got to 5-6. And then, that was after they started 1-4. They go 5-1 down the stretch. They win a playoff game. I think there's a lot to like with the Rams, and I really, really like what they've done here. And they have an out with Kupp where I think they just eat like $20 million in dead cap. That's fine. I think that's worth doing because they've definitely upgraded at receiver. The Chicago Bears, Logan, have addressed what was up there for like the most glaring position group of need in football, that being their offensive line. And they've been aggressive. They trade for Joe Thuney, get him from the Chiefs, and they signed Drew Dahlman for 3 years, $42 million away from the Falcons. How do you like what they've done with that offensive line so far?
I just like that they were willing to make big moves for Caleb. I mean, good Lord, dude.
Yeah.
Caleb had one of the worst situations in the league last season, and I think Drake May had it worse. I think some guys had it marginally worse, but I thought it was going to be a great situation for him. I didn't realize that the offensive line situation was as dire. I mean, there are just some plays where guys are getting crushed right off the line of scrimmage. I mean, one of the film breakdowns I did, dude, it was just embarrassing. Like, you had to go and do this for him. I think they've got all the wide receiving talent they need, right? Like, I think him and Odunze are only going to get better. I think him and Cole Kmet have something really good right now. I think him and Keenan Allen and DJ Moore should only figure it out more. Like, you don't need to invest any more in the skill position guys. Offensive line should be your sole focal point. Joe Thuney's still one of the best guards in the game. I mean, to get him, I think a Jonah Jackson at right guard. I like it. I'm not really super familiar with Drew Dahlman's game, I'm going to be honest, but he really can't be worse than what they were dealing with last year, and that's kind of my point about with all this. If you just get a new guy in at every position on the line, they're probably going to be better than what the Bears. It was comical. Dude, at a point in the season, they were trotting out all, in no disrespect, because you can find some diamonds in the rough sometimes late in drafts. They were all 5th through 7th or undrafted guys starting. You got some firepower. This was the biggest need by far, I think, on your football team because the defense wasn't even bad last year.
No.
I really like this for Chicago.
I love this. I give what they've done with the offensive line so far an A+. Thuney obviously was forced to play at tackle with the issues that the Chiefs had there, where I think you saw his lack of speed and athleticism get exposed some. That's not his position. That's never been his position. Now you move him back to guard, and I think that he's still one of the best in the game. Dahlman, more highly regarded as a run blocker than a pass blocker, but still an upgrade. I mean, they've just overhauled the entire interior offensive line with actual capable starters, and in Thuney's case, a really, really good offensive lineman who is basically just an automatic ticket to the Super Bowl. If you look at the history of it all with the Pats and with the Chiefs, the guy just goes to the bowl year after year, and this is absolutely what they needed. The receiving talent is there in the room, but it doesn't matter if you can't protect for Caleb. Now, I do think that Caleb also has to improve. I think that he has to process the game more quickly. I think there were games where he held onto the ball for far too long. I also think that his accuracy was a real issue this past year, but I did think that it wasn't linear progression throughout the year. There were some clear weeks of dramatic improvement, and then there would be a little bit of regression for a bit, and then you might come back up. Like, it was a rocky rookie year for him. But I think if you give him that consistency with the line, you give him more capable play calling, now he has an ability to develop more chemistry with the receivers. Obviously, the arm talent is an A+. The athletic tools are an A+. He just needs to get comfortable seeing the game consistently and reading it at an NFL level. And I feel optimistic about his year 2. I actually feel very optimistic about his year 2 with what they've done here. And I think that Ben Johnson was one of the great coach signings of the offseason because I think he is just so brilliant offensively. So I'm excited. I think we could be in for an explosive year 2 from Caleb. I think it should be a big, big turnaround, and building up the dudes in front of him was the biggest, most important step to making that happen. That and the head coach, and I think that they nailed both of them. We have a big extension story here, Logan, because Myles Garrett, despite demanding a trade out of Cleveland, has been extended to stay in Cleveland for the long haul with a record 4-year extension. What do you make of this?
I called my dad last night to let him know the DK news because I knew he probably wouldn't see it for a minute, and he brought up Myles, and he immediately cussed him and called him all kinds of nasty, filthy names and said
oh my.
he doesn't care about winning. He's a lying piece of shit. And I told him, I was like, Dad, he played the game. You know, like I think Myles Garrett used all of his leverage to his advantage because he's a smart guy. You know, don't hate the player, hate the game. I think Myles Garrett just played the game the right way. Sure, maybe all of his demands weren't exactly right. Like maybe, I think Myles cared about getting a bag, and somebody was going to pay him, and I think he just ran up the tab on the Browns. I don't blame him because, frankly, the Browns didn't have any leverage. That's why Myles used all of it against them to get this record contract. He's now the highest paid active non-quarterback in football, and he's going to get this from whoever asked. Myles Garrett is the best defensive player on the planet right now. Like, I know Patrick Surtain won Defensive Player of the Year. Myles Garrett's still the best in the league. And I'm a guy who has said TJ Watt prior to this year for the past 4 to 5 years. I think TJ Watt has been the best in the game. I think it's now Myles Garrett. And I would have paid him whatever he asked for. I think he's smart for handling it like this. And for the Browns, you should be thanking him. You should be groveling at him. You should be doing whatever for Myles Garrett, because every offseason, it's like you just got to put out fires. And now the Browns have at least put out this fire because he is the best new age Browns player they have ever had. Like, if we're just talking about from 1998 when they were an expansion franchise to now, he is the best player in franchise history.
He's the best since Jim Brown. Who's been better than him since Jim Brown?
I was going to say Jim Brown is number 1 for sure, but I think
course.
Garrett is probably number 2, depending on what you think of Otto Graham. You know, shout out to some of those old-timey Browns
that's
guys.
Still before, though.
Marion Motley, you know, guys like that. Like, word to those guys. But
Myles
Garrett is the best modern Brown ever. You can't let that guy walk out of the door. And, you put out the fire. So congrats to the Browns for retaining him. And props to Myles Garrett. I think he played the game the exact right way to make sure that his money was right. And, the Browns should just be glad he didn't leave. Because Carson, I don't know if they win a game without Myles Garrett, man.
It's tough to really congratulate the Browns on anything. I just think that they're in such a dire state of existence right now. Obviously, Myles Garrett is worth paying whatever he asks for. I also think they could have gotten a real haul for him, and I am very bummed that the Bills didn't get him. I'm just going to say that outright. And you look at the entire edge market, and there was talk about Max Crosby maybe being on the move, and then he gets extended, and Myles went as far as to request a trade, and then he gets extended. Trey Hendrickson now is the guy who it looks like he might be moved because the Bengals have the cheapest ownership probably in the NFL, but he's certainly not going to be moved to another AFC contender. So selfishly, I'm bummed about that, and I would have liked to see Myles go anywhere where he could upgrade a contender. Like, selfishly, obviously, I want it to be the Bills, but I'd also just like to see him play anywhere other than Cleveland where he can be that real difference maker for an elite team because he's such an utterly dominant football player. Obviously, that did not happen. And the edge market now, it's really dwindling because we also have news. Josh Sweat today signed to the Cardinals on a deal, I believe 4 years, $76 million. How do you feel about that, Logan?
I think it's the biggest need for Arizona, and I honestly don't think that's. I think that's pretty good value for a guy like Josh Sweat. Like, I thought he was going to get. Yeah, I'm honestly surprised it's not north of $20 million. I will say too, for those that don't know, like, the difference between paying like the best edge in football, that the reason that gap is so large is just because of how great Garrett is individually, right? Because positions are just different. Like quarterbacks, all the top guys get 50 to 40,
Yeah.
uh, there's normally larger gaps depending on position, and that's why the gap is. But that's kind of why I think this is a steal for Arizona. This was one of the worst pass rushes in the NFL last season. I mean, they couldn't get home to anybody. You just needed somebody who could go and get the quarterback. We always talk about it, Carson. I think the two most valuable things in the sport is a quarterback that can withstand pressure and an edge rusher that can put pressure on the opposing team's quarterback. You should pay whatever you need to make sure you have high impact guys at those two positions. And so for the Cardinals, I really like this deal.
I like it a lot, man. I think that Sweat had an excellent season. I think that he was the defensive MVP of the Super Bowl. What do you have, like 7 pressures in that game, a couple of sacks, forced an interception with the pressure. Absolutely dominant showing. And I think that this is really good value. And like you said, that's what the Cardinals have really, really been missing is that high-end pass rusher defensively. Now let's see what can they do with that offense next year. Can they become a team that really figures seriously into the playoff picture? I think they'll need Kyler to be more consistent in order to do so. But this was probably the biggest need on their entire roster, and they got a really good player at really good value. The Eagles are not done getting poached, though, Logan, unsurprisingly. They're just going to continue to get poached because they keep on finding so many great players and great coaches year after year. Milton Williams goes to the Patriots for 4 years, $104 million. That is the biggest of a slew of moves that New England has made defensively. They also had Carlton Davis. They had Harold Landry. They had Robert Spillane. How do you feel about what they're doing on that side of the ball?
Some of these names crack me up, like Spillane and Carlton Davis.
Why do they crack you up, man? You love Bobby Spillane.
I do love Robert Spillane. He's just a funny football player, man.
Spillane, because he's white?
Yeah, because he's a goofy-looking white guy. Yeah, pretty much. Spillane plays hard, man. Robert Spillane has some of the most heart of any NFL player I've ever seen. I gained a lot of respect for him when him and TJ met Derrick Henry in the hole and stuffed his ass in the goal line.
No way. There's absolutely no way you just said that. There's no way you just said that. No way, bro. Are you kidding me? What the fuck?
Dude, they stuffed his ass on the goal line.
Bro, and they say I'm the freaky one. You gained a lot of respect for Robert Spillane and TJ Watt when they met Derrick Henry in the hole and stuffed his ass.
Dude, I think I should cut a quote graphic from the show.
Oh my God. All right, anyways, proceed, man. Go ahead. We all know what you're thinking about. It is not football, but let's hear it.
Yeah, the Patriots needed to do something. They had a lot of cap space. They were horrible last year. They also were really banged up defensively. They had a ton of injuries, and so I don't think the defense was as bad as some of the numbers would suggest because of how injured they were. Christian Gonzalez should be healthy again this year. I think he's a bona fide number 1 corner. I think Carlton Davis is solid. He should be an upgrade depth-wise.
I'm sorry, dude. Stuffed his ass was so crazy. Oh, the totality of it.
Dude, I really need to start thinking before I speak.
You're a poet. No, you just have a natural given ability with words, I think is what it is.
But I like the moves for New England. I'm glad they're aggressive. And these are impact guys. I think Vrabel and this team don't want to... The Patriots are such a storied franchise. I think they really want this turnaround to be quick. And I don't think that's far-fetched. I think with a guy like Drake May who... Look, I know Drake didn't win a lot of games last year, and I know Drake had some low-light moments. I think Drake May, if you don't think he's going to be a stud yet, I think next year, watch out. Because I think May is the guy that I'm counting on ascending to a new level. And what better way, what better gift to give to a young rookie quarterback than a solid defense with some more depth. So I really want them to get a wide receiver more than anything else. I think that's still the biggest need for New England, and some improvements on the offensive line because those guys are really bad too. So
yes,
I really think they need to upgrade some of the talent around Drake, but this team was bad all around last year. So props to them for making some moves, but they need to make some offensive moves.
100%. Now, I do think that these are good signings. I think that they've really upgraded their defensive talent. They came into the offseason with the most cap space of anybody. So spend away. For the Eagles side, just real quick, losing both Josh Sweat and Milton Williams, I just don't think they have anything to be concerned about. They've stockpiled like the deepest, most talented defensive line we've seen. They've shown an unability to draft, unbelievable ability to draft elite talent, especially on the defensive front. Like, they're still going to be great there. These are two really good players, but they're going to be fine without them. But that's a good signing for the Pats. It is a lot. I think it makes him the third highest paid DT behind just Chris Jones and Christian Wilkins, but he's a really good football player. The only thing I would say is you need to follow this up with some real offensive upgrades, because I don't think there's any argument that Drake May had the worst offensive situation around him, with an absolute bottom tier offensive line, maybe the worst in football, and with, I would say outright, the worst group of receivers in football. Absolutely ridiculous to have Hunter Henry as your leading receiver in 2024. I think he is incredibly talented. I think he has top-tier physical tools. I love his aggression with the football, his willingness to take chances. There's just so much upside there. They need to start putting him in a position to succeed. And yes, I agree, the defense does that. It puts less pressure on him to put up points, but in a vacuum also, you got to put him in a position where he can start to maximize his production, and you do that by actually putting good offensive players around him. So that's what I need to see from the Patriots before I view them as like a playoff caliber team. But I'd be surprised if they didn't win at least 7 or 8 next year, because I think this is going to be a really good defense, and I think that Drake can give them a respectable floor offensively in year 2 if they at least make marginal improvements around him. Is there anything else you want to talk about, Logan? I mean, I'm a little bit frightened to give you free reign with where you tried to take things about 5 minutes ago.
It's on me. It's my fault.
No, it was magical, dude. I loved it. Let me see if Shefty has tweeted anything new of note. The Texans are trading Laramie Tunsil to the Commanders for a package of picks.
Interesting.
We don't know what those picks are yet.
I
I like that.
I like that for Washington too. I mean,
yeah,
they were really solid up front last year. I was gonna say the only thing they could improve is maybe the tackle spots. And for the Eagles, the last thing I want to add on that, because you were talking about them losing some key guys, I think they'll be all right. You know, Sweat, super impactful guy, but if there's one thing we know about Philadelphia, it's that they're good at identifying bargain value guys who can come in and be impactful, but they still have Davis. They've still got Carter, right?
Yeah.
They've still got Bond. I think they paid the most important guys. But it is interesting, right? Now that you've lost Slay, now that you've lost Williams, now that you lost Sweat, how much do they take a step back? I still think they'll be very good, but are they by far the best? Time will tell.
Yeah, I think that on the interior, they're definitely good. I think that they probably should look to find one more edge rusher in the draft, which I think that they can do. Like I said, I mean, they've basically just gotten hit after hit in the draft when picking defensive line in recent years. So that pretty much does it with free agency so far. The Bills have had some extensions. They paid Josh. That's just like such a non-story. I mean, I'm happy that they did it, obviously, but that was going to happen no matter what. I really, really did like the Khalil Shakir deal. I think that that'll make him like the 30-something highest paid receiver in a couple of years, which to me, it's good value. I mean, I think that he is more of a really good number 2 than a number 1, but I thought that that was a good signing. They extended Rousseau, too. I do think that Rousseau is good. I don't think that he's a number 1 pass rusher, which is why I was hopeful that it would make more of a splash. And now, even with Sweat being gone, like, unfortunately, it doesn't look like there's a path to the Bills really solving their lack of an elite pass rusher this offseason. I think maybe you could get a Chase Young, somebody in like that solid tier, but you're not getting somebody better than Rousseau.
I was going to say, too, real quick, the Patriots also got Harold Landry, which Harold was really good a couple of years ago, and hopefully he can – but, like, that's another guy that's even gone off the market for Buffalo, too.
Yeah. Edges are getting eaten up, man.
Jonathan Allen, I think, would probably be the guy. I think he regressed a little bit last season, but, I mean, I still think he's a high-impact guy that is available. So that would probably be the guy that I target if I'm Buffalo.
Just give us some former Washington Commanders, man. Although Allen plays more on the inside, and we already got Big Ed there, so I don't know if that would be our top priority. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. All right, we're going to talk some NBA now. Who's scoring big in the NBA this season? You are, with all the new ways to get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. From monster slams to dishing the rock to cleaning the glass, get behind your favorite players and the prop bets you can make on DraftKings, the home of NBA player props.
Ready to place your first bet? Try betting on something simple like picking how many points your favorite player will have. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick. First timers, here's something special just for you. New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets instantly.
Take it to the rack with DraftKings Sportsbook. Every point counts. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code NERDS. That's code NERDS for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Let's talk about the two biggest basketball games of the weekend, Logan, because we got the latest iteration of the greatest rivalry in NBA history, Lakers-Celtics, and we got it with a whole new twist, of course. The Lakers came into this one having won 8 straight. It's the first meeting between these two teams in the Luka Doncic era, but it was still the Celtics who took care of business and ended up with a win. What did you take away from this?
I don't think the Lakers can hang with Boston. I mean, that's my take, is just that if the Lakers were somehow able to make it out of the Western Conference, which I don't put out of the window, I really like what the Lakers have been doing, and I take them seriously as a real contender in the West. But if they were to get out, I think they would probably be marching to their death sentence against Boston, and it's specifically because of how many defenders that Boston has that can match up individually with Luka Doncic. That's Luka's superpower, is the attention that Luka can get. And you've seen it a lot in this Lakers run where they've been just ripping off wins. Is Luka draws 2, bang, kicks it to a wide open guy, wide open 3, easy money. Or you got a small guy, he can just abuse that mismatch with his strength and get exactly to where he wants. That's not the case against Boston. And it's not just the top guys, right? It is Tatum, it is Jaylen Brown. They can match up pretty well with Luka Doncic. We also saw that not only in this game, but also in the NBA Finals last season.
Yeah.
But it's Big Al Horford who can switch on to him and do his thing, right? Porzingis is going to be impactful in a hypothetical matchup again, too, right? Like, I just think if there's one team that LA really couldn't have their way with, I think that's the problem, because you don't have to send extra attention to the ball. If they can hang up in single coverage. Yeah. I just think that's the really big issue, and that was kind of my big takeaway. And it really sucks that LeBron is hurt right now. And I'm just hoping and praying and crossing my fingers that LeBron is going to be 100%. They only say he's going to be out a couple of weeks, which should give him time to be ready for the playoffs, but he is an older guy. I just hope that LeBron's ready to go for the playoffs, but I'm really skeptical about the Lakers' prospects in a hypothetical final series that we could get against Boston.
There's a big gap between these two teams, for sure, which says more about Boston and just their dominance. But there are a lot of people who I think have been trying to put the Lakers into that top title contending tier, and they just aren't there. I think that, as you said, this is the worst possible matchup for Luka Doncic in the NBA, because this is the team that is by far the best equipped to guard him, not just because of the sort of big wing who they can put on him, like Jaylen Brown as his primary matchup, who does so exceptionally well, but because of their ability to switch everything and have everybody on the floor guard him. And to not just be able to guard him well on an island, to be able to limit his playmaking impact more than you see in any other matchup by far, because they don't have to send help. They just switch and they say, we think that we can defend you well enough that on average, this is going to be a win for us. Luka is averaging in his last 6 meetings against Boston, that's the finals from last year in this game, 5.2 assists per game. They just never send 2 to the ball. They never overhelp on his drives. They say, we are going to limit your true superpower, which is your playmaking, and force you to beat a bunch of really good defenders one-on-one. And my God, Logan, if Al Horford wasn't the MVP of this game. It is unbelievable, his ability at 38 years old to get out in space, move his feet at such a high level, cut off drives, challenge shots consistently in the paint. This was basically the Lakers' game plan, to get Horford switched onto Luka and LeBron and force him to guard in space, and he did so at an elite level. He defended 14 isolations in this game, Logan. He allowed 4 points in total. So that is 2 scores on 14 isolations. I think all of those coming against either Luka or LeBron. That's just an unbelievable weapon to have when that guy is your center, and he's actually your backup center when you're at full strength. And at the same time, he's also providing legitimate rim protection when he is your backline defender. But this isn't like some one-off. You cannot forget, Logan, Luka Doncic shot 9 of 28, when guarded by Al Horford in the finals last year. It's a superpower, his ability still to switch at this stage. You just look back to last week. The big game the Celtics had was against the Nuggets. That game is basically ended on Jamal Murray getting a switch with Horford, trying to blow by him, can't get by him. Horford sticks with him like glue, forces him to pass out, forces a turnover. Like, he does this regularly. And then Jaylen Brown is maybe the best Luka defender in basketball. I think he's certainly on the short list. We know what he did in the finals last year, but especially in the first half of this game, he was just giving him hell. His ability to apply ball pressure, his physicality. He had 3 on-ball steals against Luka, forced him into 2 more turnovers than he had assists. So Luka ends up finding some defensive vulnerabilities, going at some weaker defenders in the fourth quarter especially, and his bottom line scoring numbers from this game actually end up looking pretty good. But if you watch this game, Luka was really held in check for a majority, and again, he was totally limited as a playmaker, which has been the theme of this matchup. And the other thing that just continues to pop up with Luka that I don't like offensively, which I've talked about time and again, is just the fact that he's not driving at nearly the same rate as he used to be. He's not nearly as insistent at getting all the way downhill, either to score or to pass. He was driving 22 times per game just 3 years ago. Now he drives 14 times per game. I mean, that is a huge drop-off. His attempts at the rim have dropped off by 40% in terms of frequency, and you see it in this game. You're able to cut off these drives, get him to take these kind of mid-range runners or to pass out. That's a win for the defense against Luka. So I do think that we've seen an increased ability from some of these elite defenses to really force him to settle and then challenge his finishes around the rim with their length. And nobody is better at doing that. Nobody is better at guarding Luka in totality than Boston. That's why I think this is the nightmare matchup for him. On one end, you saw what they did to him defensively in the finals last year, and you saw what they did to him in terms of making him try to defend in the finals last year. And again, like, that was their entire strategy down the stretch of this game. Just go at Luka. Get that switch. Try to get dribble penetration. I actually thought that he defended better in this game than he did in the finals. I thought that he was able to force the Jays to settle for some more pull-up jumpers over him. But you still feel like, on average, they are able to get what they want. They are able to make him work defensively over the course of a series, wear him down defensively. And it's not just Luka, because they're going at Austin Reeves relentlessly throughout this game, too. This might have been the most racist basketball game I've ever watched, Logan. I mean, this was just a straight milk check, bro. The offensive strategy for both teams was literally find the white guys, go at the white guys. Go at Reeves, go at Luka, go at Connect for the Celtics. And then for the Lakers, go at Pritchard, go at Hauser, go at Cornette. The difference is the Lakers are relying on that milk a whole lot more. For them, that milk is 2 of their 3 best players who are going to be on the floor for big-time minutes. And they have fewer dudes who can attack those defensive liabilities. On the other end, they just have fewer highly skilled offensive players, whereas with Boston, you always feel like everybody on the floor basically can go at that defensive weak point. But the big difference is Boston just has so many guys who guard at a high level, and that's why I don't see how the Lakers could win a 7-game series against them. Like, you can talk about the superpower that LA has with their 2 best players being the best duo in basketball, them having 2 top 10 players. But that's just not how basketball series are decided. When Boston's 3rd best player is way better than LA's. Whether you think that's Jaylen Brown or Porzingis. I love Austin Reeves. I mean, he's not remotely in the same tier as either of those guys. Boston's 4th best player is way better. Now we're talking about Derek White, a top 40 player, against Dorian Finney-Smith. Their 5th best player is way better. Now we're talking about Drew Holiday against who? Vando. Their 6th best player is Al Horford, who is still a baller, who still shoots the 3 at a high clip and is a high-level defender, especially guarding in space. Their 7th best player is Peyton Pritchard, who's probably going to be 6th man of the year and can be a weapon in these series offensively. Like, you just go down the list. Boston has so much more aggregate talent. LA will always have, by far, the 2 worst defenders on the floor out of all of the starters in this series, and they'll also have the weakest offensive players on the floor at any given time, because everybody on Boston's lineup who plays big minutes is so skilled offensively. They're just not as complete a team. And I don't think that's a surprise. I mean, they just kind of threw this thing together, and they've been on an absolute heater as of late, and they're a really, really good basketball team. But I do still think there's that tier 1 of 3 true elite title contenders that is Boston, OKC, and Cleveland. And out of those 3, Boston is the most bulletproof of all of them because of how elite they are on both sides of the ball, how complete they are on both sides of the ball, just how overwhelming their total talent is. And if I'm going to consider you a tier 1 contender, I have to see a path to you beating Boston. I don't see that path for LA. And I continue to think that OKC has the clearest path because even though there are some flaws with them offensively in terms of their consistency around Shai, they have by far the best defensive formula. Somebody to beat Boston is going to have to take that offense out of rhythm. They're going to have to be able to limit their mismatch attacking, force some turnovers, slow them down in terms of their ability to just create great shot after great shot. LA has been defending really well. They're not that team because Boston is the one offense in the league where if you just have a glaring weak defender on the floor, they'll just go at him over and over and over again. And I think in a series like this, both Austin Reeves and Luka are that against the Celtics. They are really problematic defenders. And I feel like you saw that in this game.
I have nothing to add.
Awesome. Celtics are really, really good, man. And it's been fun to see them sort of go on this run where it feels like they've played a lot of really good teams as of late. And they kind of just consistently show you that they're better than most of them. The Cavs got them, but the Cavs got them when they were shorthanded. OKC beat them in their lone meeting this year. I'm excited to see that rematch. You mentioned LeBron being out 1 to 2 weeks with a groin injury. How significant is that for the Lakers?
I mean, I don't really think it matters regular season-wise. I think this team is going to be a lock to get into the playoffs. I think Luka can float this team. I think they can be good enough. I mean, my only concern is just playoff prospects. Is he going to be 100%? Is there an imbalance? Is he tentative? Is he ginger with his movements and stuff like that? That's really my big concern. And it's not because he's LeBron. It's just because he's 40. Like that's really my own concern. It's just because he's an older guy dealing with an injury this close to the playoffs. But I think they should be fine. Regular season, I think Luka and this defense can be good enough to float them. But this defense is taking a hit. I think it's more impactful that they don't have LeBron defensively than it is that they don't have him offensively.
I don't agree with that because he is LeBron and he's just an offensive monster. But I do think that it impacts them a lot on both sides of the ball. I think that he does fill a really important role in this defense. So 1 to 2 weeks, I mean, hopefully he only misses a handful of games. Hopefully this doesn't affect his all-NBA eligibility or anything like that because I think it'd be very cool to see him get all-NBA at 40 years old. Obviously, they are fighting for seeding. Like, they're sitting in the 2 seed right now, but they have almost the exact same record as the Nuggets do. They have the same plus 18 win-loss differential, so they definitely don't want to fall to that 4 seed, in my opinion, which they're only a game up on Memphis for because I don't think you want to have to see OKC in the second round. I think you want to avoid them for as long as possible, but it's not a huge deal. You want home court as long as you can get it. You want to avoid OKC as long as you can, but at some point you're going to have to go on the road and you're going to have to face OKC. So as long as LeBron is healthy and looks right by the playoffs, that's by far the most important thing. I do think you want as much time on the court together as possible to get things really gelling just when things do come together at the deadline like this. But they were already playing such good basketball. I do feel like they actually already have a pretty good sense of what they're trying to accomplish out there and pretty good collective identity. So I think they'll be fine. I just hope that LeBron gets out there and this isn't something that lingers at all. Let's talk about the big game Sunday, Logan. Thunder Nuggets. This was a competitive game for a long while. Final score ends up being a 24-point Thunder win, I believe. What did you take away from this?
Yeah, this game was closer than the final score would suggest. Denver actually got out to a 10-0 lead early in this game. This was a frantic pace to start this game, but I don't know how the Nuggets win this series. The Thunder have one of the best defenses I've ever seen. They're number 1 in defensive rating still by 3.9 points per possession over second place. The gap between 1 and 2 is larger than the gap between 2 and 13. They've got the lowest defensive rating since 2020, and that's the Bucks and Raptors defense of that year. They're so disruptive. Their hands are elite. This is the number 1 team in terms of steals per game. I was super impressed with Isaiah Hartenstein in this game. Entry passes, passing lanes, triple threat. I mean, it's not just him. It's literally everybody on Oklahoma City. But they're tied 4th in blocks per game, too. This team was number 1 in stocks per game by an NBA team for a long time. They're 4th now in stocks per game by a team in the play-by-play era. And yeah, I mean, they're just so elite defensively, and Denver's not. And that's where I would start with this. Like, it's not just disruption, it's also rotations. Like, when a guy sets a screen on a ball handler and they automatically pre-switch, and there's nothing spoken, they just do it immediately. I really, really trust this defense in a way that I don't with any other team in the Western Conference. More importantly than that, when they're on offense, well, first, actually, I should start with this. No one can guard Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I don't think anybody can hang up in single coverage with SGA. And so already Denver is at a deficit because I think they're going to have to gimmick up their defense or throw extra attention at SGA to slow him down, which is a problem because SGA is going to play make out of that and find open shooters. And I think Oklahoma City can kill them with that. But also, I think the Denver Nuggets have a weak point defensively that can be exploited by Oklahoma City, and that's Nikola Jokic. And I don't think this is a strong defense top to bottom, but I would pick on Jokic defensively. And I thought you saw that a lot in this game, off switches, at the rim, in space, out of pick and roll. And it's not because Jokic is a bad defender. I want to be clear on that. It's because, one, he's not a great defender, and so there's things that he just can't stop. When they run a pick and roll and Jokic comes up out of the drop to switch onto the ball handler, if they run that trailing big behind him, if it's Chet or if it's Hartenstein, that backdoor lob is going to be there all day. And specifically when they don't have Aaron Gordon on the court, that's a real problem because there's no help guy who can help blow that play up on the back end. So that's an easy offensive set that they can go to. And it's not just unique to pick and rolls where Hartenstein would be coming from the baseline too. I think it's pick and rolls that you run from anywhere in the court. Basically any possession that Jokic is really away from the basket. There's another possession in this game that I remember where Jokic, I think it's Isaiah Joe, he gets dragged down to the baseline and Jokic is guarding it beautifully because that's what he has to do. And Hardenstein has a late cut where Joe finds him with a beautiful pass. If Jokic isn't there on his man, it's just really hard to stop. And again, this is a really limited defense in terms of impactful guys outside of him. And so nobody can stay with SGA in single coverage. I would pick on Jokic defensively every possession, not only because I think it's going to help you manufacture shots, but hopefully you're going to, as the series goes on, you can just drain his energy, and so he'll have less energy to expend offensively, because I don't think Oklahoma City has a good answer for Jokic individually either. And so I just see problems on both sides of the ball for the Nuggets. There's a lot that I really like about Denver. I just like Oklahoma City more. I love their off-ball offensive actions, the screens that they set for guys away from the ball. I think Denver's defense has to make a concerted effort at stopping the ball in transition and cutting off driving lanes. And the real problem, Carson, is it's not an effort thing. Dude, Jamal Murray and MPJ were playing really hard in this game, and they have been. I've been so impressed with all the hustle plays that I get from these guys and how hard they're playing on both sides of the ball. And that's kind of what scares me, is I feel like the Nuggets are giving full effort. I feel like they're really trying hard. There's just a gap. And I feel like Oklahoma City is got stuff that they can exploit on both sides of the ball. I don't know, man. I think Denver, and let me be clear about this too. I think in a hypothetical series, this is not going to be 4 in, 4 out. It's not going to be I think the Nuggets are good enough, and I respect Jokic and this team. They're going to push them 6. They're going to push them 7, but Oklahoma City's just got advantages, man, that I don't know what Denver can make up for. If they played in a hypothetical series, I would take the Thunder in 6, and I would be pretty confident in that. I just think this defense is so disruptive. I think they've got things that they can exploit offensively. And again, at the crux of it all, I don't think anybody can stay with SGA in single coverage, and I think that's just going to cause more problems for Denver. I just think Denver's a little too far away, man. It disappoints me to say that.
Well, but that's not a surprise. I mean, I think it was clear since the start of the year. OKC has been in a tier of their own as the top dog out west. The question has always just been, is Denver the best team to challenge them? And I think that's probably the Lakers now. You're talking about this would be a 6-7 game series. I'd probably pick it to go 6, but I'd be closer to picking it to go 5 than picking it to go 7. I mean, I think OKC is comfortably better than Denver. I think that they present numerous big problems for them. First of all, Denver has nothing for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Nobody really does, but Denver especially does not, with their major limitations at the point of attack and with the overall limitations of their pick and roll defense, which is just an area in which they've regressed so much. Last year, this was a 93rd percentile pick and roll defense, which is why I think when people act as though Jokic is always a big defensive liability, they miss out on so much of the stuff that he does at a high level, how great his positioning is, how great his hands are, his ability at times to provide some pressure up at the level, and then obviously his great defensive rebounding. But he also has some real limitations, and Shai is able to exploit all of them. And really just Denver's defensive strategy of sending two to the ball as much as they do has not been effective this year out of pick and roll. But Shai is going to exploit that so effectively because he is just top tier at splitting doubles, at which point you're just like absolutely fucked. Or he's just so quick getting around the edge on Jokic that sending two to the ball doesn't do anything and he's by you anyways. Or he finds Isaiah Hartenstein to connect. He's really good at slipping those little passes out against a trapper, against setting two to the ball. And then you have a really good connective playmaker who can attack a 4-on-3, and you're just going to get a good shot in one way or another when you do that. So that's what they were doing early in this game. Then they start putting Jokic in a deep drop, at which point you are just praying that SGA misses jumpers, right? Because when Jokic is in a normal drop coverage, you have the lob threat over top of him, so he's just sitting deep in the paint and saying you can go ahead and you can take these jumpers. That's not a sustainable strategy. Like SGA had a colder shooting game from deep. He was 2 of 11, but I'm not comfortable with just letting SGA get to a bunch of mid-range pull-ups he likes. Like that's not a viable defensive strategy. I think the best thing that they did defensively was go to the zone, at which point sometimes they're sending two at SGA in the zone, but you're able to provide help within the zone when he does get into the lane or get into the mid-range. And early on against the zone, I thought that he was kind of forcing some shot attempts, and that was good for Denver's defense. But then if you're going to send two to the ball against the zone, he's just going to swing it, and one more pass, they swing it, and they find an open shooter. And again, you're just creating 4-on-3s. You're consistently creating open shots, and I thought that guys did a really nice job of cutting off of him. Alex Caruso, Isaiah Hartenstein both had really nice cuts into open space against the zone, and then shooters hit enough shots. So then even the zone ended up not working. And like SGA ran 25 pick and rolls in this game, he generated 1.32 points per possession. That is an elite number. In isolation, they have nobody who can guard him. Christian Brown cannot do it. Peyton Watson is the best candidate to do so, but how much can you play Peyton Watson with his offense? Certainly not starter minutes. And at the end of this game, SGA just started going crazy in isolation to ice it, and he actually did hit a couple jumpers, and that was the point at which OKC really pulled away. So this was like far from the best Shai game. This was far from his most efficient performance, and you still felt like if he just shot better, he was getting what he wanted in this game. And he had 40, by the way, in the game that I'm saying is far from his best and far from his most efficient.
I felt like he wasted a lot of possessions on pull-up threes, and I would try to bait him into shooting as many of those as possible. But it's like, damn, man, at the end of the day, our defensive strategies we're circling back to is hope he misses shots. Like,
yeah. And he's been over 40% from deep for how many months now? 3?
I don't think there's a good answer.
No, there isn't an answer. There isn't an answer. So that's a big problem. And I do think that if we saw this series, Denver would go to the zone a decent amount. I think that OKC is going to see zone in big spots against whoever they face, because the theory there is force the ball out of Shai's hands, test his decision-making a little bit, right? And make sure that he's not going to get a ton of clean looks in single coverage himself, and then force the shooters around him to beat you. And I think that that is sound strategy. And sometimes you see you can just take an offense out of rhythm a bit with the zone, and OKC goes through these lulls with their shooting where you feel like you're taking them out of rhythm. But I was surprised to see, I looked at the bottom line numbers. OKC has averaged 1.1 points per possession against zone this year. That's more than they've averaged against man defense in the half court. They've averaged 1.03 against man. So those are both 80th percentile numbers, but they've been more efficient against zone. They're just a really good offense. And I do think that their half court offense is consistently getting underrated. And a lot of people are focusing on the issues and not focusing on the fact that they have produced consistently elite offensive results in the half court. But I think the even bigger difference that stands out in this game is just the massive, massive difference in depth, especially when the Nuggets go down Aaron Gordon early in this game. The gap in role players, it's just absolutely massive. If you take away the top four guys in this game for each team, the Thunder's remaining players, their 5 through 10, had 37 points. The Nuggets had 19 points. That's a huge, huge difference in this game. And this was a quiet game for OKC's role guys. You didn't get an Aaron Wiggins explosion. You didn't get Isaiah Joe making 4 or 5 threes. Like, those guys had a relatively quiet game, and their production still doubled Denver's because Russ had some positive impact on this game in some ways, but he was basically a zero as a scorer. You're talking about real Jalen Pickett minutes. Like, it's just absurd how many really good players OKC has, and honestly how few Denver has if they go down even one key guy. Jalen Williams was awesome. I'm talking about Jay Will for OKC in this game, and he really has been playing well as of late. His shooting, his passing, his rebounding, his defense, his mobility. He is a really quality third big. Again, you can't help but watch a team play against Denver and think, imagine if their third big or their fourth big was just Denver's second big, what a difference that would make. But it really, really does matter. It's what I was just talking about with the Lakers against the Celtics. Like, series are not decided by who has the best player on the floor. That becomes a factor when the teams have comparable talent. But if one team's third guy, fourth guy, fifth guy, sixth guy, seventh guy are all way better than the opposite teams, well, then you need a massive, massive difference in terms of the superstar play to offset that. And nobody's outplaying this version of Shai to that level. Jokic can outplay him. He's not going to give him a drubbing because defensively they just can't do anything to make Shai uncomfortable or take him out of his rhythm. So these two teams are not on the same level. This game was mostly competitive. Jokic did hurt his elbow in this game, and I think that undeniably affected his shooting from that point forward because he's missing free throws. He has a brutal game from three. He just became less aggressive as a scorer. I don't know how you could look at him in the first quarter, how dominant he was, and then if you think it's just an absolute coincidence that at the point he injured his elbow, all of a sudden his shooting touch goes away. I would not agree with that line of thinking, but that's not an excuse, and that's not the difference in this matchup. The difference is what we've talked about. The fact that I think OKC's defense can be even more dominant against Denver than they were in this game because we didn't even see them deploy the radical strategy that we've been seeing teams deploy against Jokic, where they're doubling him off ball, they're tripling him off the catch, they're completely ignoring Russell Westbrook and Christian Brown. Like, they swarmed Jokic's roles in that game, and I think that's why you saw him doing a lot more popping, but they also were willing to guard him straight up with Hartenstein a lot more than we've seen any other team really do as of late, except the Suns guarded him pretty straight up, and, you know, he had a 30-point triple-double against them, a 30-20-20 game, the first in NBA history. So I think OKC, they can be so destructive with Chet as a roamer. He can leave non-shooters, and he is probably the best healthy rim protector in the NBA right now with Wemby out. I mean, Chet is just an absolute monster there. They can guard him relatively well straight up in the post with Hartenstein, but they can also front him with a wing, and then they could have Hartenstein as a backline guy, and then they can also have Chet roaming ready to provide help. They can go small ball, and they can front him with a wing and then bring a backline double with Chet, and they can switch a bunch of wings and just like be constantly doubling him and pestering him with their crazy amount of length and their ability to force turnovers and just dare the limited guys offensively to make shots. That's what I think we would see more of in a 7-game series, and that's a problem that Denver's going to have to figure out against anybody. I do think if there's one silver lining for Denver on that front, it's not from this game, but Aaron Gordon, the game before this against the Suns, shot 7 of 10 from 3. He has been shooting so well this year. He's 44% from deep on over 3 attempts per game. So I do think him being healthy, if he can shoot close to that level, that's a really big upgrade from Russ when teams are just trying to ignore these quote-unquote non-shooters. If Aaron Gordon can actually be a shooter, and then you know that also you're not going to bait him into some of the bad mid-range looks that Russ takes. He's so much more effective as a dunker spot target, just as that bigger elite athlete there. He's got such good feel with Jokic. Like, that's a good counter for them to have if teams do return to that defense, which they will. But it's not making up the difference in a series against OKC. I mean, OKC's just got way better defensive personnel. They've got way better depth. They've got a superstar offensively. They totally won the transition battle in this game. And we've seen it time and again against high-end competition. Like OKC dominates the best teams in the league. They slow down the best offenses in the league in a way that nobody else has. They've done it to the Cavs. They've done it to the Knicks. They've done it to the Celtics. They've done it to the Nuggets. Against the other teams that have won 40-plus games this year, OKC is 10-2 with a 119 offensive rating, a sub-106 defensive rating, and a plus 13 net rating. They've dominated the best of the best. Denver, just in the games Jokic has played, not even counting the 3 games that he's missed, is 2-8 against those 40-plus win teams with a 112 offensive rating, a 122 defensive rating, a negative 10 net rating. So against the best teams in the league, OKC is still able to do their thing, produce elite defense, lean on Shai for his elite offensive creation in the half court, get out in transition, and Denver's limitations on both ends just become more apparent against the best of the best, and this is another instance of that.
Yeah, the Nuggets are cooked.
That's all you have to say?
I mean, they're not doing anything in the playoffs. I mean, they could.
Well, what does that mean? I think they could easily still get to the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah, but they're not going to win.
No, but OKC's a monster. How much better of a chance do you think the Lakers have to beat OKC than Denver does?
Way better. Way better.
Yeah, I think they have a better chance. I still think it's a slim chance.
I think they can move with the Lakers. I think the Lakers can move with the Thunder better. Like, I think they can just get up and down the floor better. I don't think they have, like, as glaring a defensive weakness as a Jokic. I think they have better guys that they can stick on SGA in single coverage. Like, again, I don't think there's a good answer. And then I think that LeBron and Luka's archetypes lend themselves to being able to abuse mismatches way better against Oklahoma City. Now, like, don't get me wrong, it's not going to be easy, and I would pick the Lakers to lose against Oklahoma City too, but there are advantages that the Lakers have that I think Denver just doesn't have. Denver, to me, just doesn't have it. There's too many shortcomings for Denver, and I'm disappointed. I was really optimistic about this team earlier in the year, but I mean, the numbers you read off against them against great teams kind of tells you everything you need to know.
It's just been a recurring theme of these teams that just have more aggregate talent overwhelming them. To me, the big difference is that I think that LA has more defensive answers than Denver does in a matchup like this, really in a matchup against any of these elite teams. I don't agree with putting it as a Jokic thing. I think that Jokic has his defensive issues. I also think that Luka and Austin Reeves have major defensive issues. I think it's just a question of who has the defensive personnel around them that can compensate for that. And the answer is the Lakers.
I mean, the
Lakers
Nuggets
have
have like glaring
really
shooting
front court.
They have like glaring shooting limitations too. The Nuggets just have way too many holes.
I do think it is important to acknowledge how many of these games they've been without Aaron Gordon, because I do think he makes a big difference on both sides of the ball. He is their best defender, and I do think that, again, he's a significantly better off-ball offensive player than Russell Westbrook. That's not making up the difference against OKC. I still think that the Lakers are a better threat than the Nuggets. I certainly think they're a hell of a lot closer to each other, though, than either team is to OKC. OKC's in a tier of their own in the West. So I think that this week was just more evidence of that, man. I mean, that record against elite competition, they're second all-time in net rating. They're 53-11, and that's been without Chet for a lot of the year. You don't fluke into that. And I still don't know if they're getting fully appreciated enough. But we are going to get this rematch tonight. So hopefully everybody is able to play and we are treated to a good game. All right, Logan, anything else you want to say about stuffing it into asses, meeting them in the hole?
I think I'm good. I'm good.
All right. Well, on that note, appreciate you guys tuning in. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, the good news is there's always plenty more Nerd Sesh content. Yes.
I do have one thing to add. A couple of the moves he mentioned with Pittsburgh. Dante Jackson is no longer a Steeler, and the Darius Slay deal has yet to go through. He's still talking with teams. I just wanted to make sure we didn't bludgeon our journalistic credibility.
Thank you. No, we wouldn't want to bludgeon our journalistic credibility like Stephen A. Smith, known journalist, did when he wouldn't stop talking about Bronny James. How funny was that, Stephen A. calling himself a journalist? What are you talking about, man? You wrote for a paper 30 years ago. Now you go on the screen and you answer questions about.
He's paid $100 million.
Which Mario character would you have sex with?
He's paid $100 million to be divisive and to be loud.
Yeah, I mean, we're not journalists. We went to journalism school. That's not really what we're doing right now.
Yeah, I agree. We are commentators.
You got to be like reporting on stuff to be a journalist. Yeah, we're commentators. Yappers. On that note, You can check us out everywhere. YouTube channel, get all of our full shows, all of our NBA and NFL content, our video essays. You can follow us across social, TikTok, Instagram at NerdSesh, Twitter at Nerd_Sesh. You can join our Discord if you want to become part of our community there. Chat with the gang. That is linked at the link tree across our social media bios. And you can check out our merch if you want. That is at breakingtea.com. It is also linked in our link tree. So with that, as always, appreciate you guys. I've been Carson Brabber.
I have been Logan Camden.
And this was Nerd Sesh.